Okay, I'm going to be your cruise director on this little trip. And I'm going to start right away by pointing out a few obvious truths. Tourism is now the world's largest industry. It employs more people than any other. Record 24 million passengers cruised last year. It's going up 5 to 8% per year. The Caribbean's about 40%, but that's spreading elsewhere. Management of the industry has gone rampant. So how are you going to stop it? Of course, the first thing to do is just say don't cruise. We're not going to allow cruising anymore. It's too dangerous for the planet. North Korea does that. They've been reasonably successful in preventing their people from traveling. Cuba is following in their footsteps, at least until has recently. The problem is that that model is not exactly replicable. So we really are trying to look at how to deal with human nature. How many of you are guilty of traveling? Yeah. Well, there goes that hypothesis. I'm going to say stay home, we're done. What, of course, it is a human imperative to travel. And our whole work over the last 25 years, since Margot's in the hospital at the moment, or she'd be here, but it's okay, it's not a problem. She'll be home in a couple of days. Anyway, but what we've been doing, we wrote the book on sustainable tourism for the UN World Tourism Organization back in 1992. And it went viral, and that's really been our livelihood ever since. But what it means is essentially how do we defuse this rapidly growing industry, which everybody likes? And how do we defuse you when you're overseas? And how do we reduce the footprint that you and the industry is making? 26 new ships in the next 2 years. Up to 50,000 additional beds. Growth, 10 to 15 new ships every year. And they're all much bigger than the ones they used to use. Also, river cruising. This is in Chungking. There are now over 40 liner-sized vessels making it up and down that river. There are literally hundreds of river cruises similar across the world. New ones now, if you want to go to Manaus, if you want to even go up the Congo. They have extra berths for the army so that they actually make it. But they are taking people increasingly to different places. So why do we all cruise? And cruising is the fastest growing sector of this immense tourism enterprise. Well, it's good value for money. For $100 to $200 a day, it's all found. That's your room, your board, you're playing bingo, the nude bungee jumping from the poop deck, anything you want to do is all included. Chance to visit several different locations, a chance to be pampered. It's a no-brainer. You get on, you get to your cabin, and after that, they take care of you. Not a hard sell. Fine dining, unless you're on a cheaper brand, but it's still adequate dining. And just getting away from it all. Would you rather be in Ottawa or in Antigua? Don't all answer at once. Not a tough one. So you've got a huge industry that's growing. It's not just summers, it's in Alaska. Winters, it's in the Caribbean. Spring, it's in the Mediterranean. Fall, it's in Australia. The fact is, it's mobile. It also has an immense economic impact on all of the destinations it visits. And in fact, some of the destinations lobby to make sure the cruise ships get there. A few years ago, when they did a study, it was $97 US a day spent by each passenger when the ship was in port. And with 3,000 people getting off your boat, that's a lot of money. Cruise ship carrying 25, 50 passengers generates $227,000 in passenger and crew expenditures in a single port of call. And that's worth having. At the same time, the other problem is how do we make sure it's used right? Sometimes it can overwhelm a place. This is Philipsburg in Saint Martin. Well, two of the largest ships in the world are in there right now. That one, oh, sorry, went the wrong way here. Ha-ha. Come back for a second. That's the one. No, not that one either. We're doing too fast. This is what I want. This one is Oasis of the Seas. It's really the one of two of the largest ships in the world, 5,600 passengers, 2,000 crew. Each of these ships is over 3,000 passengers. There's 7 of them in there. And St. Philip's and Philipsburg has a total population when they're not there of 3,000. Talk about potential impact. So how do you manage this? Of course, right away I would say, for God's sake, schedule them differently so they don't all arrive at once. Can't do that. Everybody wants to leave Fort Lauderdale or Miami on a Sunday. So they can't get there on a Sunday. They can only get there on a Wednesday. Cozumel can't stop in Cuba. It takes 2 days to get there. Tuesday is the big day in Cozumel when they can have up to 13 ships at a time. So it's really an issue of trying to manage this and some of the challenges that we've got to try and get the industry to sit down and work with the actual destinations. And I'll give a few examples a little later on. Okay. That's the one. Sometimes the ships are size big. That's Malta. And you can have 3 or 4 ships this size. They turn around in the harbor. They occupy the harbor. You almost brush both ends as they turn the ship around. Again, it's a small country. 42% of its GNP comes from tourists. And about a third of it comes directly from the cruise ships. So we have some fundamental questions. So do we have to travel? And the reaction we got earlier was, yes, we do. Even if it's just Arnprior, we're not going to stay in one place. What modes have the lowest footprint? And unfortunately, the modes that take you out of your own country don't. And I just worked the last couple of days with Dave Doherty looking at how much footprint you had if you went from here to Miami. By boat, by train, by plane, by car, or by bus. Boats are still the worst because you are carrying a lot of junk with you. And we're still working on the per day consumption, right? Bus is still coming out the best. Most uncomfortable, takes the longest, but it has the lowest footprint. But I'll get on to how some of these things are doing a footprint. By the way, this is one of the newest ships, totally electronic, robot, everything. Picture taken from something called the North Star, which is on a 300-foot boom where you can take a picture of the ship as it goes as you go along. Another one of the energy extensive things that they are putting on, along with the wave pools and the surfing and things like that, to try and get more people on the ships. They are very consumptive, water slides and things. So what we're really doing is looking at how we can reduce the footprint of the industry in a variety of ways, and I'll go on about some of these. Which was I doing again? That's the one I need. Okay, when we talk about sustainable management in the cruise industry, what we really mean is involving the planners from cradle to grave in terms of how you set up the cruises, what you do with the ships, what you do with the supply chain, what you do with the destinations that you visit, and how you keep the tourists from doing something stupid. So it means cruise planning and itineraries. We're trying to work with people to get them to make shorter itineraries so that you're not full charging between ports, but you're seeing maybe 6 or 8 ports in the same area. We're trying to get people to improve the ships with wastewater capture. And I'll go on to Alaska a little later on because they're doing the best right now. And hopefully we'll still be allowed to. Marine conservation, pollution control, protecting seas and shoreline reefs are now part of the package. You don't get to land, at least in the Caribbean or Alaska, unless you have a plan in place. And fortunately, that is not federal. That is Miami, that is Florida, and that is Alaska. So whatever happens federally in the U.S., it's probably going to continue. Ports of call, destination management. Essentially, the boats are being asked to provide money to make sure that the port is taken care of, to make sure that there's paths for the people to walk on, to make sure there's enough toilets, to make sure there's enough buses, to invest in these. Also, planning of itineraries, and I'll spend some more time on that. But let's just put it this way. In the past, the boat would land at 7, people would get into 40 buses, and the 40 buses would arrive at the church at 10:30. When people from 40 buses went roaring out into the church, Margot and I were in port in Odessa, and they were having a special ceremony for the Metropolitan. They were bringing a new Metropolitan in, and suddenly the church is just overwhelmed with 1,000 tourists all roaring in, taking pictures. Real mess. Don't do that anymore. We worked with them on that one. A little more scheduling now, and I'll get onto that a little bit later. Also, stakeholder engagement. Anybody been to Molokai in Hawaii? Yeah, not very many people have. You can't get there by cruise ship because they don't want any cruise ships. And in fact, they actually had a referendum that says no cruise ships. There's one little boat that goes to Molokai from the other islands, and that pretty well limits the number of people a day that are allowed there, and they don't want a new boat. We got it. We don't want to share it. And that is one of the issues. And if you get too many people, a lot of other places are starting to come to the same conclusion. And we've actually had places say, don't want boats anymore. Works the other way, too. My boat won't go there anymore because the people are so nasty and hostile, the tourists don't want to go there at all. And if they go there, they won't take the cruise. And that's happened with Dakar, Senegal. It's also happened with a couple of Moroccan ports. Also, more recently, Venezuela. None of the ships go there anymore. Okay, education. A lot of the cruise ships are now working with the communities to try and make the experiences far more educational, far more controlled. And so now, in the past, if you went to a place, there were 3 or 4 tours, and that was it. Now there may be 40. And often small tours. Go and visit the natives. Go out and see the orcas. And they're managed, and they're very small. And in a sense, they're delivering an ecotourism product as many of the onshore products from the industry. So if you're running a port, you got to figure out, how do I attract cruise ships here? It's a gimme. Santorini, everybody wants to go there because it's so beautiful. But then you've got to try and plan for it. And the big question is, how many can we handle? How many do we want? Do we want more boats? Do we want them all at the same time? And it means you have to start looking at investing in shoreside facilities, planning the tours and visits, buying the buses in many cases. And I'll give you an interesting example from South America in a minute. And impact management, that when 3,000 tourists land in one place at a time, the very least you need garbage cans. To be real, you need people directing them, controlling them, telling them not to climb the walls, telling them not to steal the stones, telling them not to take pictures of the holy icons, telling them not to bother the kids. So the big question then is, how big, how many at once, how often, how long, who pays, can we sell them anything while they're here? And that's a tough one. And what can we sell them? And, of course, how do we control the visitors? And ironically, you go on a lovely trip around South America on a ship, going around seeing the coastal vineyards of Chile and seeing the lovely vineyards along the parts of the coast of Argentina, and you enjoy your California wine at $40 a bottle. The problem is all the provisioning is done by the cruise ships in one place, Miami, globally. There are really only 3 cruise ship companies in the world. There's Royal Caribbean, which owns Celebrity and several others. There is Carnival, who own over half the cruise ships in the world, almost everyone you've heard of, everything from Holland America to P&O to Cunard to Seabourn, you can just go down the list, Costa, all of those belong to them. Norwegian, with which a couple own about 10%, and then there's a few other ones with older boats. So when we're dealing with them, that's who we're dealing with. The cruise line environmental group, and if you can convince them, you may be able to accomplish something. Okay, so we're saying you really dominate the place you come. You're the biggest show in town. You talk about the circus coming to town in a place like Skagway, Alaska, or Stanley in the Falklands. It has 2,000 people, i.e. a quarter what's on the ship that's docked just offshore. So when the floating city get there, you get an awful lot of people who are interested. And the thing is, therefore, the usual thing we have in all parts of the tourism sector, which is crowd control. And by the way, Disney's the best in the world at doing this. And in fact, they sell it now. It's almost making them as much money as their theme parks. They essentially have wonderful ways of making people go where they want them to. You get to the corner, they don't want you to stay there too long, it'll block others, but you see something just up ahead, so you keep going. And you get, in Barbados, they've got a lovely one, they put in a train through a cave. And it's set up so that the lights only come on when the people on the train come through. Looks like you can reach all the stalactites. You can't. They're that much farther away than anybody could reach. And they only let you stop where you want. It's beautiful crowd control. Disney built it. And it is, if you're ever there, take it. It is a wonderful experience. You'll never get closer to stalactites and stalagmites in your life. They're beautifully lit, but you can't touch them. It's very good control of how to deal with mass travel. And they had to use the same kind of tricks just as people are getting on and off docks in some places. People are being entertained. They're buying stuff. They're not bored. It's all managed. Some visitors are constrained. In a sense, one of the tricks we've been talking about is you cage them. So 90% of the people who get off in Grand Turk here really never leave this beach. It's owned and built by Carnival for its ships and for All in America and a few others. Everything you could possibly get there is right there. Lovely beach, place to drink, place to swim, stuff to buy, jewelry galore, because they own all the shops that are selling jewelry in all these places. And essentially you think you're in a port. In fact, you're in a private resort that they built. And some of the locals are, in fact, employed working there. It has been a benefit. But the locals don't buy anything there. It's far too expensive. They all take the little bus into town where they have an ordinary couple of shops where they buy their stuff. That's one of the big issues we have with the cruise thing. It's seasonal. So come April, that's closed. All the people who were working there have nothing to work on. And even the hardware store in some places is now closed. And even the ice cream shops closed. The restaurants are closed. In some cases, even the food shops are closed. And you have to take a boat to another island to get your groceries. It's been a big issue to try and negotiate. Grenada tried to negotiate that with a couple of the cruise lines who were going there and played too hard a game. They just went to another island. So it's not easy to try and manage the tensions between people who want to make money and also conserve their culture and their environment. Because you have all of these people in at the same time, you've got a real logistics problem. It can be just as simple. How many porta potties do I need on the dock? And I'm only going to use them if you're in a place where the ship comes in once a week. What are you going to do? Are you going to build enough toilets for 3,000 people on your dock? And if you don't, what happens? How many buses do you have to buy to transport people? Because 2,000 or 3,000 people coming off of that are going to want to go somewhere, and it's not always right on the dock. So you've got to look at the logistics of this. You've got to look even at having the parking places for those buses where you're going to take them. It's really a carrying capacity issue. And we've been working with ports around the world saying, well, how many can you accommodate? We've got an entire other presentation just on carrying capacity. But what it comes down to is, what is the carrying capacity? That is, how big is the port? If you've got a place that'll only take 3 boats, you've got a physical capacity. That's the easiest one. You build another dock or you don't. Social carrying capacity. We have lots of tools we're working on what's called limits to acceptable change, or how many can they take before they get so mad they make it miserable for the people who come. before they start voting against building another dock, or before they start saying you can't come because tourists are nasty to our people, or harm our kids, or get garbage all over everything. Economic. How much infrastructure can we afford? Go back to Juneau. If anybody's been to Juneau, the cruise ships all tie up on one street. And for 200 days of the year or more, it's perfectly fine. It's the main street from north to south through Juneau. But then when 6 or 8 cruise ships tie up right along it, and all the buses have to use it and have to go in and out of the parking lot and turn on it, suddenly you've got a huge traffic jam that is the middle of Juneau. So you've got the question of how much extra road do we have to build? How much at the Mendenhall Glacier, which is one of the principal places going, they've had to build a huge parking lot about a mile away and put people on to stage the buses because so many buses come there. It's really the place you do want to go. And therefore the buses are staged. The bus will actually wait until there's a space, come up, let you off at the glacier face, go a mile away, and somebody on a radio an hour or so later will call them and say, now there's room for you to come up. And they have 7 places for buses and about 100 in the parking lot. We also have the ecological issue, both sea and land, in terms of prop wash, in terms of ability to have spills, a whole range of issues that relate right back to what are our key assets. And one of the things we've been advising people through the UN is to get your planning in place regarding identification of the key ecological assets and the sensitivity of those. And whether you're going to let people walk on them, whether you're going to let people just look at them, whether you're going to have to guide them through them, or whether you just want to keep them away. And what are the true sensitivities of your key assets? Puerto Chacabuco, Argentina is rather interesting. They get 1 boat every 2 or 3 weeks. So they didn't bother building a dock. They have the little tenders you go into the little fishing wharf. But now you have 2,000 passengers standing there on the dock with nice mountains around but nothing else. What are you going to do? Well, right away you say, well, how about we buy 50 buses? Well, that's a town of 50 people. So what do? Well, what you do is you close schools in the district that day. And all the school buses from as far as 100 kilometers or more away come to the dock. And the school teachers actually are many of the people who are driving the buses and giving the lectures on the thing. And that works fine once every 2 weeks. But if you have a boat every second day or every day, that's just plain not going to work. And so we start reaching thresholds where, hey, are we going in it for real or not? And the moment you get up to a place like Prince Rupert, they're at that critical point where 1 or 2 ships a summer come in, and then you have to deal with them. Another place like Stockholm, no problem. Ships dock right inside a city of several 100,000. They can walk to everything. Public transit works. The impact of a ship in that circumstance, a place like there, or even Vancouver, is very little, or Quebec City. So again, when you start carrying capacity and impact, you've got to look at the circumstances into which people are going and whether they are significant or whether they're simply part of the mass. The key things we talk to people about is looking at the impact of shore tourists on the ecological resources. How many people can you take there and under what circumstances? How many at a time? How do you stage them? What are the impacts of sea tours on fragile ecology? You don't want to let 100 people snorkeling on a reef, on the same reef, particularly if it's near the surface. Or many of them won't know how to be on a reef. They won't know you don't stand on it. They won't know you don't steal stuff. They won't know how to be quiet so that they don't disturb the wildlife. The impacts of levels of use on natural systems need to be known in advance and to understand where the fragile sites are and really how to manage people going through them. And I'll give you a couple of hints on those in a minute. Onshore tourist waste management. People are pigs, and they're worse pigs when they're not at home. They don't have the peer pressure. They often behave quite differently when they're not in their home base and when the lady next door is going to call their mother and tell them that they were being stupid. And so we have problems of just controlling the behavior of people in different sites. And, of course, resource consumption. If you take somebody out to a site and they don't have water, and in Latin America, where there's a lot of very desert environments, you've got to be prepared. You have to have the water in place. You have to have supplies and provisions. Economic considerations for destinations is another one. We work with sites in advance and say, well, what are you really after? Fact is that most people don't buy a lot of stuff except souvenirs. So if you're a hardware store in a little town and people come in, you're saying, oh, the boat's coming, there's 3,000 people, they're all going to be customers? No, they're not. The odd one may have forgotten a few batteries or their glasses. But quite frankly, they're not going to buy a thing. And unless you stock up souvenirs, they're not even going to come into your store. It can be very seasonal. You go to a place like Ketchikan or Antigua, the shops in the main street, half of them now are jewelry stores, camera shops, perfume shops, and they're only open during the boat season. And the guy who just sold you diamonds in Ketchikan spends the month of May driving to Florida, where he then gets to Antigua and to sell you diamonds there. The same shops, the same people. We talked to one guy who lives in a camper year-round, except it's in Skagway for half of the year, and it's in Florida the other half of the year. And he... All right. There you go. That's okay. I need a breath anyway, John. Right. The industries that do benefit, however, are transportation. Taxis are going to be busy as hell. Automobile and boat rentals. Tour operators, the guy who is actually going to take walks through the jungle, they're going to do fine. But they need to be negotiated again with to make sure that they are managing the impact of the people who come. And unlike normal tourism, like Banff National Park, or pick any other place, people come gradually. They don't all arrive at the same time. The ship, they all roar off at 8 o'clock in the morning. And they're all going to be back when the boat leaves at 4. And therefore, the window of opportunity focuses everything right there. Anything more than 2 hours away from the port is not going to be affected at all. And people who expect it is, if they're sadly misled. Now, let's go back to the ships. What can we do to take these huge floating hotels and do something about them? Because, as I said, Dave and I are looking right now at the actual footprint. We hope we'll put it on the website as soon as we figure it out in terms of comparative footprints of these. But it's a floating resort hotel. Essentially, the guy who runs the rooms is called the hotel manager. They have now, the average ship is 3,400 beds, plus the people who are on serving. And there's, well, if it's a rich ship, it's 1-to-1. If it's a poor ship, it can be as much as 4-to-1. But there's a lot of people employed there. They now have all these new toys on board to keep people occupied. Wave riders, water slides. A couple of them even have ice rinks in the basement. That's fun on a rolly day, I'll tell you. It'd be exciting. So they have all the challenges and opportunities that relate to greening hotels. I have another presentation on the tricks of greening hotels, but they're all pretty well the same. And it really just means trying to lower the ecological footprint of that. You're dealing with energy systems. You're dealing with whether you buy stuff that is recycled and so forth. The same thing with food and how you handle the food waste and so forth. It really consumes energy, uses water, produces waste, uses toxic substances. And there's a new covenant now that's pretty well handling that. Yet the odd time there's a mistake and they get fined like crazy. $35 million to Holland America last month for something they did in Alaska. So the fact is it's real. And particularly those ones going out of Alaska or members of the Caribbean Confederacy working out of Miami, they're pretty good. Gets a little more shoddy when you get outside. But because it's the same lines globally, they're pretty well the same. And they're doing their best to contain all waste. Or if they dump, they can dump gray water, but only beyond 12 miles, or in the case of Alaska, 30. So there are good standards. And the reason Alaska could do this is that there are about 8 different ports. And so they got together and they said, you ain't doing it here. And they also, by the way, are forcing the ships to plug in when they're in port, which means that they are using hydroelectric power in port. That cuts down by about half their actual fossil fuel consumption. The new ships, that's one of the biggest ones. That's Allure of the Seas. There's 4 of those now in existence, 5,600 passengers, 3,000 crew each, all Royal Caribbean. They are the most efficient ships per passenger of all ships. And that one actually has a park in the middle. That is an open area. Everybody has a balcony, but some have a balcony onto the huge park, which actually has trees and a circus, stuff like that in the middle. So it is actually, people say, well, it's bad, but that's what it used to be. That was the typical cruise ship in 1992. And that had about 1,400 passengers. And those were round-the-world cruises. They're about the size of a lifeboat on this one. So it's changed a lot, both in impact and in the ability to manage waste and to manage other things just because of scale. But they're certainly not there yet. There is a lot of reduced physical impact of the actual ships because they have more fuel efficient. Very few use bunker C anymore, but most are still using fossil fuels. Cleaner technologies. They burn an awful lot cleaner. They're not allowed to put up smoke. If they're caught doing that, they got a very large fine for air pollution in most ports. Ocean and waste management systems, most have contained waste management systems for all primary waste. It is therefore at one of the ports or more pumped off and put into suitable treatment systems. Again, in most places, but not necessarily in third world ports. They can hold for about 2 weeks, but if they don't hit a place that has decent sewage treatment facilities, within that period they are constrained, and they try to plan around that, but we do know of instances, particularly in the Indian Ocean, where they let her loose and hope nobody's looking. So that has got to be fixed. MARPOL, if they are caught under MARPOL, they could almost lose their license. And if they're caught under MARPOL, they are normally not allowed back to Miami. And there's no cruise ship on the planet that doesn't hit Miami once in a while. So it is a fairly strong impetus to make sure that they take care of this. Who polices this? The passengers. If they are the most likely people to report something done, like when you hit a whale or when you dump stuff overseas or you're being followed all the way across the Pacific by a train of seagulls, they tend to use these indicators, and they are, in fact, investigated. Again, U.S. is the best. We're not bad. Mediterranean's pretty good now. Caribbean, shaky in places. But again, there are violations. And cruise lines' own environmental policies and practice. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. It covers most of the ships running. Royal Caribbean has programs. They have an environmental officer. They have programs to support research, education, destination management, money that is spent in the ports for education and awareness. They have expedition funds for places like Galapagos and so forth. They are making actual investments in destination standards. And in fact, they're behind the Global Sustainable Travel Council's initiative to establish destination-level global standards for all destinations. I'm actually working on that, so it's a disclaimer. And the idea now, we're trying to work on something called Standard for Sustainable Shore Excursions. We can do it, but right now it's not popular. And it's something that's going to come maybe in the next 5 years to be a standard for all of the people. And it will also be following right into the people selling you tours when you land at the airport as well. The shore excursions and tours will have to meet a standard, or at least they will be able to advertise that they meet it, and it will be enforced. Carnival has its own policy. That's the one that's the largest. They have stuff on labor, human rights, social impacts. They have a statement in their annual report. They are accountable for it most of the time. They have been caught in non-compliance. And again, the fines, because they are so visible, tend to be pretty big. We have their attention. Holland American Lines belongs to Carnival as well, but they now have a very specific environmental management system that's probably going to spread to the other parts of the organization. Norwegian is advertising EcoSmart cruising as being a greener version than the others. We think it's a pretty good idea to have them in competition on the marketplace. They are providing the choices, and we're going to try and get something on eco-footprints for each ship, just the same way there's a health standard that the U.S. health people put out, and which will be visible and available to anybody. So if you want to be on the healthiest ship right now, you just go on to the U.S. Department of Health and rank the ships. How many have failed inspections, how many have had things, and you can tell. You can tell which is the best one and which is the worst one and which ones you really shouldn't consider going on. And we're hoping to get the same thing going for environment. Some resistance, of course, from the cruise ship companies because they claim that so much of their impacts are outside their own control, whereas in terms of the health and sanitation of the ships, they can manage them and control them. Okay, the Alaska model. Alaska works because all the ports went together and said, you're coming, you're following our standard. You're coming, you're paying money to be there. So much a passenger day for being in Alaska waters, which will go for conservation. It has its own gray water standards, which are much higher. You got to go at least 30 miles, and its treatment before it's released has to meet higher ones. Fee of $1, it's now $3 a passenger going for a monitoring program to monitor the impacts of the cruise industry. And the new one, you plug in. Every port that has a dock has plugs, and you shut your motors off and you plug in. Every port except the ones that don't have a dock and where you have to tender in. And therefore there's a big incentive now for the state to help places like Sitka or Kodiak actually get a dock where the ships can go. And until recently, the U.S. EPA was prepared to put some money in to help that happen. Don't know. Seattle has a comprehensive port plan. Vancouver now has a green policy and has essentially made all the shore providers go for a green policy, green procurement, green management. It's only been out there for about 5 years, so it's difficult to see how good it has been yet. It's due for its 5-year evaluation. So impacts on the port and town center, saying that we know there are big impacts right on the port and town center. I mentioned some of them already. And you're getting displacement of the local stuff by essentially mass merchandisers of tourist kitsch. So you can't go to a place where you can't get a Senior Frogs, where you can't buy a T-shirt made. How are we doing? How's our time going, Madeline? You pleasing me?
It's almost 8 minutes to.
Okay. I'll do a few more then, and then we'll quit, and happy to answer questions. But I'll go through these a little more rapidly than I might otherwise. Tours, most visits 12 hours or less. They all leave at once. A lot of options, and we're trying to get them to spread it around to make sure that more sites and more villages nearby. You don't all go to the one village, you go to a couple of others. You don't put everybody on one beach, you take them to others. Give them more options, and for people who've traveled before, that's better because you don't have to go to the same place every time if you're back. This is my poster child, a place called Lamini in Belize. Now the boats have to tender in because the shore is so shallow, you can only get small boats out to the ships. So between 9:30 and 10, all the boats come out and bring the people in, and they use the tenders from the ships. And you get maybe 3 or 4 ships at a time. Okay, the buses all leave for the site. This is one of them, New River, one of the tours, at 9:15. Fast boats take tourists up the river to Lamini from 11 to 12. They visit the Mayan ruins after lunch, 12 to 2. The boat's back at 2:30 to 3 o'clock. They get back on the bus, back to the dock at 3:45 to 5:30. Last tender to the ship's 5:30. So what you going to buy? Even if you wanted to buy a cheap T-shirt that says, "This is all Grandma got me," in Belize, you haven't got that chance unless the vendors are between the buses and they're taking you back to the ship, waving them at you. And the tour guide is saying, "No, can't wait, got to run." So that's the problem with one of the biggest problems with the cruise ships is that some places just can't get the tours to have a low impact. What do? Well, in this one we gave them a few ideas, but essentially Lamini is one of the neatest places. It's one of the must-see places. It's a beautiful Mayan temple in the middle of the jungle, up a river, beautiful little village. The people are prepared to cook and make you a lovely lunch. The most popular tour. So these are really a challenge. Now, what are we telling the ships? We're telling them, get lights on the boats so that you can leave later. Because down there, remember, sunset's at 6. Up to this point, under various requirements for tendering, they will not allow them to tender in the dark. So, and tourists will not get up in time to leave before 8 o'clock. So this is a rock and a hard place in terms of a tour manager. And you can't get faster buses to take them the 40 hour and 45 minutes up to New River because the roads aren't good enough. So this is a nice tactical and strategic challenge for you to make the tour more ecologically efficient. And it can't not roar up the stream because it's a long drive. And so what are they doing? They're eradicating all the wildlife that the people came to see along there, knocking the sloths out of the trees. So how do we fix that one? I don't know. Some of it comes back to visitor management. Keep them on a hard surface, keep them away from the animals, keep them managed, give them enough time so that they don't have to walk through things that you're not supposed to step on. And make sure they have a guide telling them they're not to go and try and pat the penguins. Okay, so what you know when you're going to get a cruise ship in, everything's going to be within 2 hours drive from the ship. Half-day tours, it's even closer. Some people don't want to spend half the day in the town. Some want to get out. So you got to look at what they're going to do. And that really limits where you can go. Some ports don't get custom because there's nothing within 2 hours. It may be a cute little town, but you can't get to the beautiful mountains or you can't get to the nice beaches. So right away, choosing a tour port for the people running it comes down to this. And again, we're back to all the parking issues and all the others we mentioned. All cruise lines are not the same. So the one that is a party ship has quite different impacts. When they roll the drunks off onto the wharf in Puerto Vallarta, it's quite different than when you take small expeditions off these ships, the small ships they're going to Antarctic cruises. And when they're taken off in 10 or 12 at a time on little rubber boats and managed in terms of their interface within with the wildlife. I think one or two of you said you'd actually been to Antarctica. I have not. That's as close as I've got at Ushuaia. But the fact is that it is amongst the best managed stuff, but it is managed small. And that's why the challenge that this young lady has about the cruise ship going through the Northwest Passage, this is new, it's new for these people. And all of these questions come to play, including how to do the visitor management on site and there, and making sure they go where you want them, not where they do. And yet they still come back thinking they had a good time because you managed them properly. Okay, so you can do managed demand, you can reduce management. Not many people from cruise ships go to Machu Picchu because it's too far away, but because it's so good, some will take a helicopter to fly all the way there at a very, very high price. Zoning. You zone it, you only let them into the ones where you have hardened areas of zoned. Facility design and crowd management. Hire Disney. people do it really well is Grenada. You phone ahead, you get a time of arrival, and there's never more than 350 visitors within the precinct at any one time, and you've got to be out when it's your turn's over, and it's kept running. But they never have the crowd issues. Visitor management, signage. They don't have any problems with people putting their hands in the water in Zimbabwe here. They've actually lost the odd tourist. Effective signage can work. Facilities management, clean up after them is really what it is. Managing cultural impacts, that's an issue. Just getting the people who speak the language of the tourist can be a real challenge. Okay, I will just go over some of the some of the success stories. The final questions are, how is this industry dealing with climate change? That's one of the big ones. Easier for them. They'll move the boats. If you have a port that's frozen in less, they'll go earlier. If it is frozen in more, they'll go later. If the rain season changes, they will put the boat in another part of the world. Even if they get weather events, they'll go around them. And many people get to go to a different port. I saw Crete. I didn't mean to go there. I was supposed to be in Santorini, but there was an 80-kilometer-an-hour wind, so we did Crete instead. They move them. Cruise ships very seldom are damaged by hurricanes because they see them coming, and they pick another island. And we're on the second last slide if you're lucky. I think you are. And, of course, if you get civil strife like they do in Istanbul, there's about a quarter the number of ships going to Istanbul this year as there were last. So, how do we sail towards sustainability? There's a lot of big challenges still there. Some places have been there a long time. This one is St. Thomas in U.S. Virgin Islands. They are loaded for bear. They get 10 ships a day sometimes, and they're fully capable of handling it. But it's not exactly a pleasant little island destination. It's kind of like the world's largest Caribbean shopping mall. Okay, I'm done.